And what better time than this when we could have met just at the background, at the backdrop of the Copenhagen talks, debates as to how successful or how not successful it was. And here we have two of the panelists who have just come back from Copenhagen, and one, of course, who understands the entire position that India really wanted to take before we went and what really we were trying to convey to the rest of the world. But just a few points before I really get the panelists to come in on four broad subjects, four broad areas of focus that we thought that we could put in. One, of course, the negotiations, the basic issue of negotiation. Can India be seen as a deal maker rather than being seen as a deal breaker? And we have in the past been seen as a sore thumb, right, really not wanting to let negotiations go ahead. But let's understand that in context as to how we really perform and whether we can really perform a role of getting people together and come up with an agreement. Second, on financing and technology, what's this type of scope that India really has today? And I believe that it has. It is a huge opportunity for Indian industry, for India to develop technology not only just for itself but for the world, and also how it could lead an institutionalization of a funding mechanism. The third, the entire issue of mitigation. We have as we know, within in the domestic arena, we have really talked about the National Action Plan for Climate Change. We also have the Perform, Achieve and Trade, the PAT scheme that we have introduced domestically. We have also been talking about, and the Minister announced before he went, and it has now become a huge subject in India, emission intensity cuts and the 20 to 25% in the next 15 years. And the fourth issue, which has been of importance and focus, is adaptation. And this is again a huge scope for India. We have just only begun talking about it, but something where we need quite a bit of focus to understand how we can really work in this entire area of adaptation and create really, and India can take leadership in globally in the area of clearly defining the issues of adaptation. So I think while these are four thoughts that I would like to leave behind with the panelists, but would also like to really understand from them as to what really is the road ahead beyond Copenhagen. As we have seen the talks emerge, we have heard the Prime Minister yesterday, and he did touch upon some of these issues from where I think we will take the lead on. And I'll first turn to Mr. Arun, Member Planning Commission, to give his comments and remarks and on what he sees as the entire framework as it is emerging, and what the government of India, what does it think as to what happened in Copenhagen and the way forward, especially in the context of India taking leadership in the areas that we touched upon. Mr. Maira.
Thank you very much, Chandrajit. You said we are meeting in the context of Copenhagen, and since the fact really sings, we don't know whether the music has really come to a stop. It seems that we want an agreement in Copenhagen, and even if the agreement is that we agree to disagree, that would be an agreement, but we said that's a bad thing. So let's say we'll have an agreement that we will agree. What we're going to agree to, we don't know, but we're going to end up by saying we've agreed that we will agree, and I think that's what we're going to get at the end of it. With some statements here and there, but the essence of it will be agreed once again that we must agree. So it's very important to agree. I'd like to share three pictures, context of climate change, of rising waters and people in boats when waters are rising. The first is a boat which is sinking at one end, and people at the other end, up in the air, out of the water, quite happy that they are not drowning and celebrating actually. Thank goodness the hole is not in our end of the boat. This has been the attitude of many people in the world towards problems in other parts of the world before climate change. About poverty, but thank goodness we are not poor, and it's their fault that they are poor. If they were just like us, they wouldn't be poor. So let's celebrate how good we are. But when we came to climate change, the recognition came that actually we are all in the same boat. And their problem is our problem too, and we are all in it together. The second picture is a picture which was described by a scientist, an environmental scientist, an American, at a meeting in Sweden 2 years ago, where he was, as a scientist, characterizing what the problem was. And it was again a hot debate between people from China, ourselves from India, several people from African countries, European countries, and so on. And Chinese and we Indians were bringing the point, and the Africans, that the per capita question must be always central. It's about individual human beings and their needs and their rights. And he said, the scientist, that the problem is that you have too many people. I mean, it's immoral that you have so many people, and now you say that, therefore, you're going to be putting more burden on them, but we are going to suffer at our end, at the US end. So he said the calculation shows that if everybody in the world, 8 or 4 billion people in the world, were to live in the same way that the Americans live, then the boat can only support 1 billion people. And he said people should, maybe they are, and they should aspire to live in that decent way that Americans live. But nature has a way of taking care of the problem, and so you'll see that disasters shall happen and so on, and only 1 billion shall survive. And of course, jokingly, he said, by God, we intend to be part of that 1 billion. The third picture, but it raises the question about what are the goals of development. What do we aspire to? What do we think that people should have? What model, what image do we have of what a good life should be? The third is a Noah's Ark. You're familiar with the story of Noah's Ark, where God commanded Noah to get 2 of every species onto the boat, that all species should be able to sustain and to carry on. And thus only, he said, the world shall be sustained. I don't know, someone could correct me, but I don't know whether Noah was told to also take every species of plants also onto the boat. Maybe he was, but maybe that was the idea, that things so interrelate. You can't say the whole, if you let go of any one of the parts. Can't dismiss it. So from these 3 pictures, I want to now come to the tracks for action. The progress that the world needs to make to not sink as a whole is going to be along 3 rails. The one rail, the one that we are most engrossed with, is the rail of governments and their responsibilities and negotiations, the make or break in their negotiations. And that's very exciting, actually, to go with that. And you asked me to say at the end what government, and I don't want to, I want to talk like the citizens, and I will come again to that, with the government or citizens, and that's the course of action. Now, at these meetings in Sweden that I was referring to, they went on for the last 3 or 4 years, when people there, caring people, government people, scientists, civil society people from 70-odd countries across the world, were recognizing that after Kyoto, things weren't going well. Bali was a fluke come to begin with. Then Bali also passed, and the lesser countries, let's say, got their voice included and heard. And Copenhagen was to come in a great fear that it would not work out. So what should be the other way to do it? And we said, let's get this subjectivity out of it. People, trying to defend their own positions and their right to be on the board. Let's leave it to scientists and economists. So some of us have put up the hill and said, let's be away from this mucking around and this politics and all that, and think objectively of what is the solution for the world. And in that, it became pretty clear that none of the scientists, all of us together, economists, understood the whole system. Interventions that were being suggested were backfiring, or could backfire in other parts of the system. And of course, we had the biofuels crisis that had just taken place, and food crisis. Evidence that you don't understand back and forth effects of things. And this morning's paper, for example, saying there's some studies to say that plastics, which people have been saying are bad for climate change, the production of plastics, are actually very good. Because if you see the effect of the use of plastics, actually overall it's very good. Then I say, well, some people say let's have forests and have more forests and the better it is, so let's convert our deserts into forests. But who knows, if you take the deserts away, the temperature gradients and the moisture patterns in the air will so change that we may once again get water in strange places because we apply the solution which in one hand looks okay, but we don't understand the linkages between so many things to go there. So the scientific track also has much more to learn, and it has limitations actually. That's the scientific, industrial, economics track of progress. If people say leave it to the market, leave it to the science, leave it to economics, it will happen. I feel we may get solutions that backfire. Bad incentives in them. The third track, though, is the track which is about people and civil society. If you come out to why is it the governments aren't able to agree, it's about defending the rights of their people to live in a certain way, to have future prospects in a certain way, to do that. So unless the people in their own nations and countries demand of governments that we will live in another way, and you have to support us in another way. Don't support us in living in the way that we all know one should live in this modern developed way, in some other way. I'm afraid governments, elected governments, have no choice. They have to go that way, which is a problem back in Copenhagen right now. So we come down to master civil society, and the World Business Council of Sustainable Development, which some of us engage with too, and its solutions to say that the world is really divided into two parts: the developed world, which in some ways have caused the problem, they've consumed more than their fair share of space up there, and the developing world, which wants space up there, divided into two parts. The developed world will have to learn to limbo dance, that if you want to have the sort of comforts that you currently have and don't want to give that up, you're going to have to so contort yourself in terms of science and gadgets and new things and technologies that you can go below these bars which say you must cut down by 80%, for example, your impact on the earth. Whereas we in the developing countries are told, don't emulate that, just leapfrog, find different solutions, what you're saying our opportunity is. So I want to come to, not government, but the track I think that will work. But firstly, I can see the need to say that we've come to this problem because of the first enlightenment. That enlightenment which said the science of the parts and get sharper and better at managing a part that is you are assigned to is resulting in a systems problem. And we don't have a science of the whole. And so to learn to think of the whole and the interactions between the parts of the whole is something that will be there. And could India be the developer, the user of the new science of the whole? Also, you use the title here which says the session is about can India chart a new course in the fight against? I don't think Mahatma Gandhi would have liked such a term. So the fight for something, the fight for a vision of what you wish to have. Which comes again to my thing that we in civil society, what's the vision of the life that we wish to lead, which has also these values that we won't affect anybody else by the life that we so lead. And in the opening of this Aspen India Festival, Maira said that perhaps that's the role for India in the world. That we were founded at our independence with this thing that Gandhi told us that lead the simple life and care for those who have even less than you. And in the world also stand up India as a nation for the rights of all, the poor and the rich. I just want to leave that as the framing of the leadership role that India could play in the fight for a safe and better world for everybody. But I don't know the details of what is required, and I'm wondering what they might be.
Right, I think that's a very good way of leaving it, saying that this fight for as to how we can rather than a fight against climate change. With that, I'll come to our next panelist, Mr. Suresh Prabhu, as all of us here know him not only as a former minister but a person who has been leading, has a leading role to play globally, I would think, on climate change and sustainability, on environment. Mr. Prabhu, if you would like to really touch upon as to, you've just come back from Copenhagen, you were in the center there, listening to what was really happening, and is it a deal which has failed? Is it right for us to now think that we'll have to really look at a new order in our talks on climate change? What could be India's role there, and do we really bring in the developmental aspirations which Mr. Maira really brought in effectively? Because at this point in time we don't seem to be the perception is we don't seem to be going anywhere.
Thank you. In fact, you asked me a very pertinent question about Copenhagen and fight against climate change. I think all those who went to Copenhagen representing their respective countries, they probably told that you have to fight, but they're not told properly that what you have to fight. So they're fighting each other rather than fighting together the climate change, which is a common threat to all of us. So fight was there, but unfortunately the enemy to fight against was not known to each one of them. And therefore, at the end of the day, the casualty is climate change itself. I don't think we really have a deal. Of course, we politicians are very intelligent people, so therefore we'll never let anybody other feel that we don't have a deal. So we'll show it something which is not a deal as a deal. So that's a great deal that we'll make. But at the end of the day, there won't be a deal that we really wanted, because what is the deal that we wanted to begin with? So basically, when we signed Kyoto Protocol, we never had a scientific evidence that climate was changing because of human action. Because climate keeps changing all the time. It has changed for millions of years and has changed from ice age to today's reality. People have really changed. There are dinosaurs who no longer move on the planet. So climate is changing all the time. But what is the uniqueness of this phenomenon now that we are witnessing is climate is changing because of human action. But that evidence we never had when we signed the Kyoto Protocol. Subsequent to that, just about 2 years ago, the fourth assessment report of the IPCC, which is in fact the scientific body of almost all the countries of the world, who unanimously agreed that there is almost a 95% certainty now. They didn't want to say 100% obviously, because 95% is as close as 100%, to say that climate is changing and changing for sure and changing because of human action. So therefore, if that is a phenomena that we are witnessing, that climate is changing because of human action, obviously we need human action to reverse it. And that's what in Copenhagen we wanted a deal. And that deal therefore had to consist of a scientific evidence which you talk about, and science must reflect in the action that was going to be manifested in Copenhagen. And what is science saying? That today we must limit our emission to something like 350 parts per million. If we don't do that, then probably it will just go out of hand, because ecosystem, as you very correctly said, it is, it's not a computer simulated model that ecosystem works on. That, I will change here and I will change that and then the ecosystem will change. The nature does not follow any laws that we make in our parliament, or even we had one international parliament, we have something like UN, but UN of course doesn't pass laws. But even if we were to, it is not going to follow, the nature is not going to follow those laws. So ecosystem is a very complex phenomenon, so therefore at least what we know is that let us limit the emission to 350 ppm. Now in Copenhagen, when everybody went, before Copenhagen there was a G8 summit, in which we actually gave by to that consideration completely. We said now we are not bothered about 350 ppm. What we are now going to think about is that the temperature should not rise above 2 degrees centigrade. So when you say 2 degrees centigrade, how do you measure 2 degrees centigrade? Are you going to carry thermometer every day, all the heads of state, and to find out whether it is changing, not changing? So 350 ppm is something which is a quantifiable target, would have been a better way to judge it. But that anyway we gave a go by. So we actually created from something concrete to abstract. So that we can always say 2 degrees centigrade whether rising, not rising. So anyway, that was the agreement. But subsequent to that, even in Copenhagen we are not able to reach that. We are not even able to reach to a level of 2 degrees centigrade. Again, to make that, so therefore first we must agree on a load that planet can take, and it should not be more than 350 ppm. And that we are not now given a go back. So Copenhagen anyway was a failure even before it began, because we are not agreeing on that. Secondly, unless you bring in an element of per capita emission, I'm not saying this because I'm an Indian, this is something which we have to accept as a reality. And this was in fact incidentally was a formulation first made when I was the environment minister in 1998 in Buenos Aires, COP4. I had articulated this on behalf of India and on behalf of all the developing countries, that if you want to come out with an equitable solution, because the UNFCCC, United Nations Framework Convention of Climate Change, which is before Kyoto Protocol, signed in Rio, UNFCCC talks very clearly about equity. And if you want to address equity as a concern, how do you address it unless you bring in per capita emission? There is no other way you can bring in per capita. So per capita emission has to be brought in. Then obviously 350 ppm, per capita emission. These are the two things which must have focused into this, which are nowhere there now. Therefore, anyway, whatever deal we sign finally, will be just an eyewash. Everybody will like, because nobody wants to come back home in the midst of such a strong public opinion that we are not made a deal. Nobody wants to say that. So therefore, this is what is going to happen. As far as India is concerned, in fact, we should be really striving for a deal, because India is the worst sufferer of climate change without causing it. We are the victims, but not a culprit. But though we are a victim, we are suffering from it, and therefore we must address its challenge. We must arrest the phenomenon of climate change, and therefore we should have strived very, very hard for a deal. Rather than making political statements, we must make sure that we bring all the parties together, and we should have done that. That has not happened, unfortunately. So India is going to really suffer a lot. Already, in my opinion, the cost of adaptation to climate change is going to be something like 4% of GDP. If you calculate all costs of adaptation, agriculture is the biggest sufferer, water is a big challenge, energy, of course, we have to change the energy mix completely. All our current infrastructure which are being created, we have to make it climate proof. So there is a huge cost attached to it. So therefore, who is going to bear this cost? So Indian economy will have to bear this cost. So even if you claim to be growing at 8%, and if half of that is going to be spent on adaptation, so it's like whether we are running fast, but we are making jogging and spot jogging. So somebody else is thinking I'm running fast, but actually I'm not moving at all because I'm moving in the same place. So this is what is going to happen. So therefore, this is a very serious challenge for India. Now, what India should be doing? In fact, on one hand, we must politically work to get a deal. On the other hand, it's a great opportunity for India to completely bring in a paradigm shift of development. In fact, all this climate change has happened after the Industrial Revolution. In fact, you know it better than me. In 17th century, India's GDP was more than that of Europe. We are 24%, Europe is just less than that. So after that, what has changed? Which India's GDP came to 1952 to about 3%. Now it's less than that of the world GDP. What happened in that period? That's the Industrial Revolution which changed the whole process. Now, after Industrial Revolution, is a great opportunity coming now. In terms of post-Industrial Revolution, first time, all technologies will have to be made climate. Whether we agree in climate Copenhagen or something soon thereafter, it has to happen, because otherwise, if you continue like this, everything will be destroyed, so there is nothing to be changed, because the nature would take over. But, so therefore, it's a great chance for us to bring in new technologies. The new development paradigm which is going to come will be on a new technology basis. India could be home to those technologies. In fact, we are such brilliant people. We have the IT, we have the engineering technologies, so we could make the best for technology. Secondly, the real energy is solar energy, because that's the energy on which the human beings and the planet survived for millions of years. Now that solar energy, fortunately for India, we have got about 300 days of good sunshine, which even China doesn't have, Europe doesn't have. So we have it. So we could immensely benefit from it, and therefore we can actually be home to solar energy. And therefore India should try to be taking advantage of this situation, try to politically make sure that the deal is made, make sure that equitable burden is shared by all the whole world community. But on the other hand, we must try to bring India into the focus of new home for development of new technologies, for solar energy, for renewables and others, and we should try to do that. Unfortunately, what we have to really make that point to everybody else, that India and rest of the world, we are sailing in the same boat. So it hardly matters whether who's on the top deck or on the lower deck. The boat sinks, everybody sinks. So there is nobody is going to say that, afterwards maybe somewhere, whether we go to hell or heaven, wherever we go, then somebody might only ask you for a record purpose. There is a government of India there also. Then when you died, which berth you are traveling, because I must keep it on record. So at the most, that's the only thing to say. Otherwise, everybody is going to sink anyway. So therefore, how do you actually ensure now that we work on a deal and make sure that really India benefits from it is a real interest for India? Just my last point, that we talk about mitigation and therefore energy comes in, but we must talk about adaptation and the water must come in. Because if mitigation is energy, adaptation is water. And for India, water is a big challenge, we must work on it.
Thank you. That was very clear. India must work for a deal. India must take leadership in getting a deal done. Much at stake for India and lots of opportunities. I'll move to Seema now, my colleague who heads the Sustainability Center for CII. And Seema, would you like to take us through as to how India is actually probably showing leadership in front, Indian industry is showing leadership, both in terms of walking the talk And second, in terms of whether we are being able to really take advantage in terms of the opportunity that it provides us, and what are we doing globally in terms of really taking advantage of the opportunities, especially in the front, like what Mr. Prabhu talked about in the technology front. So.
Thank you, Chandrajit. Well, I will pick from where Mr. Prabhu left, and I think he made a very important point. That while we must try for a deal at the global level, and politicians and all the negotiators must talk about it the way we are talking, at the same time we also have to concentrate and focus a lot on the ground here in India. And as Chandrajit said, I can probably illustrate a few things that are happening already in India, which give us some confidence that maybe we are actually going on the right track, but lots needs to be done. Let me pick on 2-3 examples here. First of all, let me talk about the green building movement that CII pioneered. In fact, let's say 6 years ago, even before the world was talking of green buildings, or it was very much a West phenomenon, India and particularly CII actually pioneered the entire movement, saying that even though we understand that at that point of time it may cost us a little bit more to build a green building, we need to develop our capacity, our capability, our industry to actually take advantage of this. And we all know that buildings actually take up most of the energy, almost 27-20. So now what we have in India is a whole movement, a whole revolution around green buildings, where company after company is now understanding that if they invest in this kind of infrastructure, it's really low carbon, because you don't really have to pay for the energy as much as you pay when you don't have a green building. Now this happened without any framework in terms of a policy or an enabling framework that usually we in industry are always waiting for, that something will be given to us and then we will respond to it. And I think that's my second point really, that we need to be proactive in India, and more so I speak for business and industry. The most important step for us would be to not wait for complete clarity or complete predictability. Of course we need some clarity and predictability, and we can't just function from one step to other without having that. But without always waiting for something like a carrot or an incentive coming to us, we actually need to proactively look at opportunities, that how we can actually become world leaders. Let me give you the second example here now. Indian industry has been voluntarily disclosing its carbon emissions. In fact, even saying that what is their emission intensity, what is their carbon intensity. And this has been made possible again by a CI initiative which we have been doing for the last 3 years with the Carbon Disclosure Project, where top investors and investing institutions in the world are actually asking companies to voluntarily disclose their emissions. Now what has this led to? 3 years ago when we began, again we went through this process of, is this really required? There is no legal obligation for India. There is not likelihood of any legal obligation for India, and therefore Indian industry will not really get any impact in the next 5 or 10 years. But the logic and the rationale again was that proactive voluntary actions will actually result in better gains for us. And now we have a lot of Indian companies. I'm really happy to say that over the last 3 years, companies have started measuring not only their scope 1, as we say, emissions within their boundaries, but scope 2 as well. They have started to also use internationally acceptable models of determining these emissions. Have started to constitute board level mechanisms to say that what they will do in terms of a strategic response once they look at these emissions. What has happened is that these companies are now very well positioned to take advantage of what the government is bringing in now, which is what CB mentioned, perform, achieve and trade scheme. The PAT scheme, when it will come out in January 2010, all these companies who have already monitored, have already put in place their strategies, can actually take the advantage of that immediately. So again, the point that unless we actually are proactive and voluntary, we actually will miss the opportunity. The last point that I want to make here is that, which Mr. Prabhu already touched upon, and I think it's an extremely important point. India can actually provide all the solutions that the entire world needs on sustainability. Be it mitigation related, be it adaptation related, energy, water. We have that kind of, I would say, enterprise. We have that kind of, innovation within us. And when I use innovation, I say that really the innovation is the answer for it. Basically, unless companies at a unit level will innovate and would start to look at the challenge of climate change by putting on an innovative hat and saying that how can I provide innovative solutions to energy access to all. move away from building those large, giant infrastructures which are required, but then if I have to really provide energy access to the 400, 500 million people in the country, I don't have to only wait for grid connected power to come. So how can I provide that decentralized model, and how can I actually build those solutions which will provide the answer? And I think innovation would be a key for that. And we can see some of the Indian companies who are really doing well have completely changed their business model to become more innovative, to provide answers. In the last month or 1 week or 2 weeks, we saw the Tata Group actually unveil the Swatch, their product which will actually provide purified water at a decentralized level at low cost. Similarly, there are companies like Cosmos Ignite Innovation which provides solar power backed LED-based lighting system and therefore energy, which replaces kerosene and candles which villagers are using. And this is not based on charity, it's a business model based on which they are able to provide this. So I think businesses will have to innovate, and they're already on that path, but it's not a mass movement. And what needs to be done is more amount of awareness. And second point, while I said that we don't wait for a very predictable environment, some kind of a I would say a clear path needs to be mentioned or shown by the government also, which if we wait for the global deal, I don't know if that will be too late. But within our country, we have the National Action Plan on Climate Change, which is good, and which is good enough if we actually put that into action. Because right now it's a roadmap and needs to roll out. So if we really put it into action and everybody kind of aligns themselves to the National Action Plan, I think we can be optimistic about how India can actually fight for a reversal of climate change. Thank you.
Thank you, Siva. Yes, Mr. Maira, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I just want to reflect on what both of you said and just put my framework in mind. All of us have frameworks in our minds and we listen to things through our own frameworks. I hear Mr. Prabhu rightly saying that leadership in the negotiations, leadership in bringing about an agreement between governments, India should do that too. I heard you say also, Seema, emphasizing leadership in producing the technologies and the industrial solutions. Yes, we should do that too. But the third track, you see, if you take just the first two, I think the USA, by power, will have leadership in the negotiation, leadership in technologies because of the money and where the whole economy is. But it's the third one, leadership in modeling a new way of being as citizens of the world and yourselves, and how you live in a sustainable fashion. I don't want to go to the extreme of Mahatma Gandhi, but there is an idea about how we should be and how we should care for things. And I'm not sure that without leadership in that or change in that, the other two are going to come to a happy conclusion.
Absolutely, that's a very, very well made point, and I think lots of people would here in this hall would really come up much more with to take that issue forward. But here clearly we see that there is a possibility again of India once again of having a lot of opportunities, possibility of missing those opportunities. We don't seem to be still having our act together internally, domestically. All of you have talked about, yes, India can be in the leadership, India can provide leadership, both from the technology point of view. Second, coming to the developmental aspirations of India, we have really not internally, domestically been able to really demystify, so to say, the action plan. When you are talking about 20 to 25% reduction in carbon intensity with the type of developmental aspiration that India has, majority of our people living without electricity, there are challenges. And I think what really needs to be done at this point in time, and I leave it for your response, is how do you first explain to the people of India as to that this would be again inclusive, and how this would be done and the carbon intensity would be the focus on the denominator, that is growing the GDP, would be much more than the numerator, which would go up in terms of the absolute emissions, because today absolute emissions are bound to go up in India, and for which You need, and you also need India to grow at 8% at this point in time, within a short frame of time, and 10% aspirational growth rate. So how do you really meet up with these challenges, given the developmental aspirations that we have? Large number of people still living on zero emissions, and they would have to be brought into the developmental network of plan of India. Third is, India has been, and you all, you, Mr. Prabhu, especially, have been in the center of what's been happening in our negotiating framework. Is India making a shift in its position from what it had when we initially started? And if so, why are we doing it? And are you seeing any consensus that's at all emerging? Because at this point in time, when you concluded your remarks, you also I didn't find you conclude with a lot of optimism. You did conclude with a lot of sort of a pessimist approach, if I would say that yes, this deal is going to fall through, and therefore we really don't know what next, so to say. But yes, we must have a deal. So just with these 3 points, may I have quick responses from each one of you, and then really throw open for more for questions from the floor.
Let's start with Mr. Prabhu.
Sure.
I think the way you put it is that you want to communicate to people that what is happening is we've done a good job like leaders, and at the same time managing all the muck up there to make sure that you get a good job done for the sake of the people. And politicians are required to do that. So what would you say?
Firstly, if you talk to a common man in India, he does not understand the nomenclature of mitigation or adaptation, or he doesn't even know, probably not heard of a word climate change. But he's suffering from what is called climate change. Whatever you see, the unseasonality of rain, the weather pattern changing, the rainfall pattern changing, the intensity of natural disasters taking place, the heat waves that are hitting us, the cropping which is getting affected because of the result of all this. And if you go to the coastline, and we have got almost 7,600 kilometers coastline, we go to the coastline, people are already suffering because of that. In fact, when the sea level rises substantially, maybe half meter or 1 meter, I don't know, then whatever the water will come inland is going to get contaminated with the fresh water, and groundwater will get probably destroyed forever because they will not become potable thereafter. But even before that happens, even today, the coastal people are suffering because of climate change. So climate change is something which common men are only suffering from. They do not know exactly the meaning of it. So the first, we must try to explain to the people that whatever we are trying to do now is actually to address these challenges. So the climate change and poverty, climate change and maybe gender issues in many ways, climate change and energy issues and the inclusiveness of that, all these are related to this phenomenon of climate change. Again, the climate change cannot be fought only on Indian soil, because this is an integrated ecosystem. Therefore, we must have a global action. So if you can explain to the common person that what I am doing now globally is actually for addressing some of the day-to-day problems that you are facing on the ground in your own village, in your own home. If you can explain that to the people, I think this could be a very good way. Unfortunately, we have not done that. In fact, if you just permit me one deviation a little bit, I was in China when about a few years ago, and I was on some program, so I was going from different places. Every day, I was seeing in a Chinese town a big sign, and Chinese alphabets I cannot, of course, obviously the characters I cannot understand, but Chinese use the same numbers like this. So every day I was seeing 748, then some other village I go, I would see 747, the next day I would see 746. I was just wondering, from village to village in the central town, or not village actually, the big town, but in the central town hall, why these words are came? What is the number? So I asked them. He said, oh, this is something which we are trying to, these are the number of days left for us to join WTO. So I said, but why are you putting it to the town? He said, of course we have to explain to our people what are the benefits of joining WTO. And they are preparing them for joining WTO. Look at it, which is the country most benefited from WTO is China. That's how they got $2.2 trillion of furniture reserves accumulated from exporting to all over the world because of WTO. China is doing the same thing in terms of explaining to the people what are the effects of climate change on the people. Have we done any domestic communication like this in India? We have not done. So I think we should try to communicate with the people, very effectively explain to them the linkages between all these issues and try to explain to them. That's one part. Secondly, talk about how can climate change will it affect our developmental aspiration, I think it can be married in a way that in fact we can actually help benefit from the climate change issues and also address some of the inclusive issues. For example, what Sima mentioned about distributed generation of electricity. In fact, this is a very good opportunity. So currently, rather than supplying to all the 600,000 villages electricity from the grid, we can actually do it in a distributed generation manner. This could be a great opportunity. In fact, people can benefit more by this. Then the number of jobs that can be created, if we move from this high carbon part to low carbon part, in a totally different sectors on which India has a natural advantage. Rather than importing fossil fuels from the rest of the world and try to develop it, so of course they are helping Middle East and others to develop. So that's a good thing, that because we are all human beings, so we are fellow human beings that develop in some other part of the world, so we should be happy. But actually present India is benefiting as a result of this. So if we can actually make sure that our domestic resources are harnessed in a manner that actually are leveraged to benefit the Indians themselves, we can always definitely benefit from. So therefore, this is a very good opportunity currently to change the development pattern in a manner that helps us. In any case, this so-called development that we have done so far has helped us to be a $1.1 trillion economy, but still it has left us with about 33%, 34% of people living below poverty line. So in any case, that challenge has not been addressed with the present development path that we have pursued. So we really need, obviously, to grow at 10% in my opinion, and it is definitely doable if you work like this, because if you do an analysis, the import of fossil fuel at the rate at which we are importing it is actually not helping us to grow at the rate at which we would have grown otherwise. So therefore, if we can just change the energy mix, that itself can help us considerably. So therefore, I think this is a great opportunity. We can change the cropping pattern in conformity with the new reality, adapt to it. I think this could be a great opportunity for us, in my opinion.
I'm having a problem.
Sure.
Mr. Prabhu, if you can help me. Okay, let's say that the three of us, the government and the political sector and the corporate sector, and the other people over here, right? And you said that, we got to communicate with the people. And I'm just reminded of, again, this conference was in Sweden, where the Swedes, to tell the world that there was going to be climate change 3 years ago, had these pictures of polar bears of dwindling icebergs. And these women from Ghana, were there in their Ghanan dress and stuff. And they very sweetly said, so, what does that matter to them? And then someone explained, but you see, your water will diminish, go to different places and all that. I said, oh, but that's happening right now. It's about that, is it? Fine, then why don't we do something about that? Right? Why don't we do something about that? And you rightly said that water is so serious for us in India. Water is part of this whole system that is getting disrupted. So if people here want to be told that what we are doing is to help you, you have to say this is water and there is something being done for water and not about the carbon in the air immediately. That may happen 20 years down the road to them, or 30 years down the road. And so when you come to the budgets that are being put into, let me broadly call it all climate change. If you can say that the budgets to manage water more effectively, because you mentioned water, is part of that, right? Rather than the whole diversion to something else, okay? So I think we can get hijacked by other people's images and agendas which don't really connect with our people.
In fact, rather than talk about carbon intensity,
yeah,
we should talk about the intensity of issues on which they are facing today. So
right.
That's the intensity. So the carbon intensity, nobody will understand. In fact, that somebody.
I think what you're saying is that let's de-jargonize, let's communicate with people. Let's also look at the immediate challenges which people would really appreciate.